Good afternoon. Thought I'd start again with another quote like I've done in the last couple of weeks. If you think lifting weights is dangerous, try being weak. Being weak is dangerous. And that's from Bret Contreras, who, if you're not already, is worth following on Instagram and some of the other social media channels. But again, if you think lifting weights is dangerous, try being weak. Being weak is dangerous. And that is something that resonates with me massively and something that everyone should think about, because when you imagine lifting weights in a gym, people automatically assume that we're talking about big, heavy weights. And the thought of that in some people just makes you feel aches and pains already. But it's the idea that if you were to drop a weight or if you move without being able to control that weight, you could cause yourself an injury. And so people are so scared of thinking of what the end is because they know they haven't got the strength to control it. They don't even think about starting it because they think that at some point they may well cause an injury, and it's safer to not do that and just stick to other things that might appear to be safer. But it's a little bit like anything. If you were to start running and you'd signed up for 10k and you didn't really train and you just went and ran a 10k without doing any training for it, you're going to pick up an injury. If you went on a big long walking holiday and you don't really do much more than sort of 5,000 steps on a daily basis and you suddenly go and do a 4,000 hill walk in the Lake District, you're probably going to pick up an injury of some form, or something's going to be angry and sensitive as a result. And the gym is the same. If we jump in at that deep end with the big weights and we haven't prepared our body for it, yes, there is the risk that we could pick up an injury. There are risks associated with the gym. However, we start small and slowly and gradually build and allow the body time to adapt, and recognizing as an older adult you're probably going to have to leave it a little bit of a longer period of time to progress. We really mitigate those risks, and not only do we kind of reduce the risk, we get the benefits of being stronger, because again, if we look at the other side of that quote, being weak is dangerous. From a physio point of view, I see it all the time, and a lot of the research shows that if we have a loss of muscle strength, that is often associated with various things. So arthritic type pain, so knees and hips, etc., a loss of strength actually tends to find that they're more symptomatic, they're more painful. So by building strength around the joints, you tend to find that the symptoms reduce and they become more manageable, sometimes alleviate fully. We're not necessarily changing the surface of the joints, but by being stronger, there seems to be an association with less painful joints. Tendons are the same. Tendon pain is a lot more common, particularly in women after menopause, and the strength in the muscles that join into a tendon. So tendon connects a muscle to a bone. So the muscle that connects to that tendon, if the muscle's stronger, it absorbs more of the forces in the impacts that go through the body, and the tendon is shielded from that. And in the process of building strength, you're creating some resilience in that tendon as well. So again, being stronger actually reduces tendon pain. So we can look at it from things like pains and joints and injuries, but we can also look at it a bit further down the line. So if we continue that loss of strength, we're going to lose a bit of balance, and if we trip, we might not have the speed and reactions to break our fall. And there is an increase with lack of strength that we get increased chance of falls. Those falls might involve a fracture, and that recovery period after the fracture, we're more immobile, which accelerates and creates more of an environment for the loss of muscle strength or sarcopenia to kick in. And for those who have a hip fracture after the age of 60, 20% are then likely to end up in long-term care and never come back out again. So again, it can then deteriorate even further. And I know I'm painting kind of a very extreme picture at one end of the scale there, but it's all down to that lack of strength. So initially, that lack of strength and being weak may well lead to some injuries, or more an environment where injuries and pains and things that are already there become more symptomatic. But then that, say, can lead to more falls, more hospitalisation, and eventually sort of the worst case scenario of more mortality. So yes, whilst there are risks associated with the gym and lifting weights, by not doing it at all and allowing sarcopenia to kick in, because if you're not building strength, you're going to be losing some strength rate will differ for all of us, but you will eventually lose strength, and that loss of strength could lead to some of the things I've just talked about. So I very much agree with this quote. If you think lifting weights is dangerous, try being weak. Being weak is dangerous. So yeah, the gym is something, and strength/resistance training is something we should all consider doing, but we just have to be very mindful at the start that we're going to need to take things slowly to mitigate all those risks. So like I say, if you haven't already followed Bret, well worth looking at. Whilst you're on Instagram, make sure you follow Never Too Old to Lift there. But let's get going. So welcome back to another one of these weekly Q&A sessions. So these sessions are your chance to ask me any questions that you might have about starting strength training as an older adult. Whether that you've not got started yet and you want to get started, you might have already started for a while but you're not sure what the next steps are, or you might be struggling with an exercise, anything related to that, please do use these sessions. They're every week at 12 o'clock on Wednesdays. So these are going back out to YouTube and Facebook at the same time. So on YouTube, if you're watching there, you can use the chat feature and you can send me a message live or a question live, or if you're watching a replay, then use the comments underneath and I will check those at a later stage. And again, same on Facebook. Use the comments feature whether you're watching this live or after the fact, and I'll get those messages, and if I don't answer them in this one, I'll answer them in future weeks. As always, I really appreciate it if you can, whatever you're watching this on, if you could click the thumbs up button to like this video, and just ensure that you're following Never Too Old to Lift on Facebook and or YouTube. So if you're YouTube, just hit the subscribe button. It really helps get the video out to more people, and more people can come in and ask questions. So as always, I've prepared some 4 questions that I'm going to go through, but if any other questions come in live, then I will answer those whilst we're here. So I had someone come in by email asking me, what are the best exercises for a rounded back? So they elaborated and said they felt very aware that they've noticed their shoulders start to round forwards, and their mother was a very extreme case of that, very hunched, and had that kind of that dowager's lump on the back, and she really doesn't want to go down that route and wants to avoid that. So I wasn't sure what the best kind of exercises to include in a workout, to sort of, if there's anything that can be done to prevent that, basically. And the movement pattern that most people tend to neglect is the pull movement pattern. So when I talk about movement patterns, there's 7 that we tend to incorporate into strength training, that when we're in the gym and working out, we're doing, rather than training individual muscles, we're training movement patterns. We're training groups of muscles to perform a movement, and they look like movements that we do on a day-to-day basis. So one of them is a squat, the act of standing up and sitting down, which again is something we do several times a day. So we're doing a little bit of a squat strengthening when we're doing that. When we're picking things up and off the floor, we might do a bit of a hip hinge, or we might go down into a lunge, which are 2 more movement patterns. Pushing, if you're getting up from a chair, you might push through your arms, or if you get down to the floor and you might need to push yourself back up again. So pushing gets used quite regularly on a day-to-day basis, but the pull movement pattern, where we might be pulling something towards us, or we might even be doing a pull-up, so we're pulling ourselves up towards a bar and then lowering. There's not a huge amount of that we do on a day-to-day basis. We don't really pull many things against resistance. So they tend to be the first muscle group that start to lose strength, because we're just not using that muscle group. So if we're not using it, we tend to lose it, and we lose strength there. And it's those muscles are very much the muscles that are associated with keeping that more kind of upright posture. And if they're weaker, that can lead to the more rounding, particularly if our push muscles develop and get stronger. So what we want to do is try and incorporate all of those movement patterns into a workout, and we really want to try and to build strength. We want to try and push those muscles to fatigue in order to be able to build strength as a result of doing them. So the big thing is making sure that you do include pull exercises within that. So one of that could be either standing or seating row. So to get people started, often use just a resistance band, and you might hold something and you're pulling that resistance band into it, so it's kind of anchored to either a door handle, or you could use a banister, something solid that's not going to go anywhere. If you're in the gym, you could use a cable machine, and again, you've got it set at the height of your arms, whether you're seated or standing, and you're pulling that in and back out. You might do a lat pull down, where again you use a bar from above, you pull that down and back up. Various options, you might do single arm bent over rows or double arm bent over rows, but some kind of pull action is going to help you build the strength in the muscles in kind of the top and mid back, and by building strength there, we're less likely to fall into that rounded posture. But again, like I say, it tends to be the one we don't use on a day-to-day basis. And also, if we're only ever doing body weight movements, sorry, my cat there. If we're only ever doing body weight exercises, they're hard to get any pull action in there. You need to be able to pull something like the elastic or something like that. So whenever we're doing body weight only, every other movement pattern tends to get used there, other than the pull one, and maybe the trunk rotation sometimes doesn't get used as much. So it's why it's really important to start to bring in resistance exercises. You're working against the resistance. And weights sometimes are a bit more limited because you can only use a weight in the direction of gravity. So bent over rows are really the only ones you can start to do the pull action on. So a resistance band does add another option, because you can then anchor the resistance bands at different heights and then use that direction to kind of work against. So great bit of kit for home with a resistance band. If you're in the gym, the cable machine is probably a better option. But good, so I hope that helped there. Next question I had in, and I've had this a few times over the last month actually, is I already do body pump classes. Is that enough, or do I still need other strengthening exercises? And I think body pump classes are great. I think any classes and any movement is brilliant, but particularly body pump, to get you confident using weights in a kind of friendly setting, and there's other people doing it, and it gets you in each week is great. But just because you're working and doing exercise with a weight or against resistance doesn't necessarily mean you're doing strength training, or doesn't mean you're going to build strength as a result of doing that exercise. And you'll have, if you've watched these regularly, you'll have heard me say several times that you need to be able to push a muscle to the point of fatigue, ideally within 15 repetitions, in order to build strength. And that's where the problem with body pump classes are, that you're generally doing exercises to a track or music track. And because of the length of the track, you tend to, and again, I'm just going off what other people have said. I haven't actually done a body pump class myself, but they tend to, so I've never really counted, but I think from what I hear, you might be doing 30, 40, 50, even more repetitions of that movement throughout that music track. And if you're doing that many repetitions, you're certainly not pushing your muscle to fatigue within 15 repetitions. So you're now not building strength. Even if you push to fatigue, but you're getting there at 30 repetitions, you're certainly not near the strength building sort of range that we need to be at. You're going to be very much down in that endurance phase, which is, again, it's great to be moving with weights, but if you specifically have strengthening muscles in mind, you really need to do some outside of the class in a gym, not necessarily in a gym, but it could be done at home, but with sufficient amount of weight and resistance that the time you get to your 15th repetition, it's pretty much the last one you could have managed. If you could only manage one or two more, that's great. If you could have done another 5 or 6 more repetitions, then it's too easy, or you're not using enough resistance. You need to add a bit more weight on to try and bring that down to 15 again. And then once you've got comfortable at reaching fatigue there, you actually want to increase the weight and resistance more, and over time you can build the weight so you're reaching fatigue at 5 repetitions. But that might take you a few months to get down to that point. But if you're always doing 30, 40, 50 repetitions in a class, you'll get to a point where you're not building strength, you're just building endurance. So I would say body pump is great, and it's a great way to complement the strengthening work. And the great thing about BodyPump is you're already familiar with the movement patterns, because it's generally a lot of the same movement patterns. It's got you comfortable using a barbell or using some form of weight. So again, that's not new to you. So you skip a first couple of steps of building confidence in the movement patterns, and you can just start to just increase your weight from what you're already doing and what you're already familiar with, and then build from there. So you're a step ahead of a lot of people if you've already done BodyPump. That for me, they're not quite enough, and people just assume that if you're lifting with weights in a BodyPump class, you must be strengthening. But unless you're happen to be reaching fatigue earlier than everyone else, and then you take a rest, then you're not actually building strength anymore. You are just reaching fatigue there. So I think I've probably repeated that too many times there. So we'll move on to the next question. If this is all something you're quite interested in learning more about, I do have a completely free downloadable ebook for you. So it will go through a lot of the theory, like that strengthening to fatigue or to training to failure, and some of those different movement patterns that I mentioned at the start, and how to kind of get it from 15 repetitions down to 5 repetitions. It's going to help you have all the theory that you need to put together your own program, and how to adapt that program around your ability level and your needs. So if you go to nevertooldtolift.com/start-here, or if you just look in the description below, and there'll be a link, and you can click that, and that will take you through to download that, and you just need to put your first name and your email in, and then that'll get sent straight out to you. If you're the type of person that doesn't like the idea of trying to learn off an ebook, and you'd like something more physical, I do have the physical copy of the book, which is available from Amazon. So if you just search Never Too Old to Lift on Amazon, you should find that there. And again, I think the link is in below, actually, in the description, so you can find that on Amazon. And if you feel like you need just a bit more of an interactive way of going through all of that content, and you'd like some weekly support from me via some group Zoom calls where I can help you adapt and guide and help you find your starting point, then there's also the online course version. So it's nevertooldtolift.com/course, and you can learn a little bit more about that there. But for now, let's say, if you do have any questions and you're watching live, then please do use the chat feature on YouTube or the comments feature on Facebook. And if you are watching the replay, do leave questions, because I do check these every week to see if there's any questions that will come in that I can cover in next week's Q&A session. For now, the next question I had was, will training to fatigue or failure cause DOMS? So for anyone who doesn't know, DOMS means delayed onset muscle soreness. So it's the ache that people tend to get, not necessarily straight away after a gym. They might do a gym workout, and then somewhere within the next 24 hours normally, they'll start to notice the muscles that they've targeted in that last gym session start to ache. And that isn't a bad thing. That's normal, and the intensity can vary depending on the level you come in at. So generally, people find the worst DOMS, or delayed onset muscle soreness, that they tend to feel is on the first session they work out, or if they've had a big gap and they go back in and they go very heavy with the weights, or they're working against a lot of resistance on that first session back, then they'll tend to feel more extreme DOMS. So if I've ever not done an arm workout for a while, I then almost get to a point for a couple of days I can't fully straighten my arm because it's quite sore to do, and it's, for someone who's new to that can feel very worrying, and it almost feels like you've caused yourself a negative by working out. But as long as it is just muscle type soreness rather than joint specific soreness, it's not something to worry about. It can be normal, but there are things we can do to try and reduce the intensity of these DOMS when you first get started, because when you do train to fatigue or failure, that is when they can start. But if we've built up very slowly and you've got used to the movement patterns, you've added a little bit of weight, and you've got used to doing the exercises with some weight, but you're still not reaching fatigue yet, and then over time you then start pushing to fatigue by increasing the resistance, because you've prepared your body, your muscles, your tendons to the demands of that exercise, you tend to find that the DOMS is a lot less severe. Whereas, say, if you jump straight in, found a workout program, picked a weight that's quite heavy, it might not even be too heavy for you to do the workout, but because it's such a jump up and you reach fatigue straight away and you're pushing to failure, that DOMS can be quite intense and it can last a few days. It can be, you might hear people talk about when they do squats for the first time, the next few days they find it difficult getting up on and off the toilet because it's a lower seat and that squat hurts. But again, it's not necessarily a negative, but if we can reduce intensity, it makes sense to. So we don't want to really kind of keep pushing things too hard straight away. But there are some people who almost get disappointed if they haven't achieved DOMS after a workout and they feel like they haven't worked hard enough. So some people see it as a very positive thing. Some people see it as a kind of a negative that puts them off trying. But yes, back to the question, will training until fatigue or failure cause DOMS? Yes, it will, but you can, or it's very likely to, but you can alter the intensity that it may come across. So I hope that has answered that one there. And then last question, and I had someone in the clinic this week and they mentioned about the fact that they're a regular runner and then they do a couple of gym sessions as well to complement their running. And when I explored their kind of routine a little bit more, it turns out he didn't really do any exercises for his legs. The gym work was just upper body, because his thought process, and a lot of people I've come across, their thought process is, I already do enough for my legs because I run. I don't do much for my upper body. Hence, when I go to the gym, I'm only going to do upper body and I'll give my legs a bit of a rest. But in reality, the legs are probably more important to work in the gym because you want the strength in the legs to be able to deal with the demands of the running. So the strength training will create more robust, resilient legs to allow him to continue running longer into life and to continue to run longer and longer distances. I always challenge people that they should probably be doing more leg work in the gym than even upper body. But I tend to focus on the full body and try and get them to not just work the legs, to work some trunk type exercises and some upper body in there as well. But if you're only ever doing running and only ever working on the endurance and not building strength, it's very likely you're going to be losing strength in the legs. And at some point, if we go back to what I talked about right at the start, is if we're losing strength in the legs, the demands of running are much higher than that of walking, and you'll need more strength in the muscles to absorb the impact that comes through the floor and the stresses that come through the legs when we're running. So you're more likely to pick up tendon injuries and potentially joint pains and some muscle injuries. So it goes back to that whole quote of, if you think lifting weights is dangerous, try being weak. Being weak is dangerous. And it's the being weak in the legs that is more likely to show itself first within the running. And then as soon as you lose your running, then you become less active and so forth. So big thing I try and get everyone to do is the other common sort of myth that people then often think is, if I get big bulky legs, I'm going to be slower with my running. And I had someone else I spoke to this morning that worried that by adding strength training into their routine, they were going to suddenly end up like Arnold Schwarzenegger and be big and bulky, and that's definitely not the look they were going for. But they were only wanting to do strength training twice a week. And for those bodybuilders, they work at a very specific intensity for each workout, and they're generally doing almost 2 sessions a day, and they're working out, they're probably 6, sometimes 7 days a week. And by doing 2 sessions a week, you're certainly not going to end up bulky. And also, to build strength, we can manipulate the weight that we use and the number of repetitions and sets that we do. And we can focus primarily on strength with not as much muscle size growth, whereas you can flip that and you can train for muscle size with a little bit less strength. And the strength can look very different. So a bodybuilder looks very different from the world's strongest man type events, who looks very different from a gymnast they're all very strong, but in slightly different ways, and they train in slightly different ways. So the type of training we're talking about, where you're doing it twice a week and you're doing a full body workout a couple of times each week, you're not going to get big, bulky, and in this runner's kind of fear of getting slow. You're going to get stronger, you're going to be able to deal with the demands of absorbing that impact, less likely to pick up an injury. So we're training for a robust body that can deal with the demands of daily life that we put through it, and we're training for function to keep active, not to try and win competitions or get bulky or anything along those lines. So yeah, do I need to strengthen my legs if I run already? Yes, you certainly do. If you want to keep running for as long as possible, we want to kind of work on your natural suspension system through the strength in the legs. So good, I hope that's there. And if you know anyone who has that kind of thought process, then it's worth sharing this with them. Again, that were the 4 questions that I come pre-prepared with. Happy to take on any questions for anyone watching live now. So please do use the comments or the chat to ask me any questions live. Whilst just waiting to see if any questions do come in, I'm just going to mention those 2 resources that you might be interested in. So the first one is completely free, going to help guide you through creating your strength training program around your different ability levels, going to help you adapt it. It's going to be all the theory there that you're going to need to do that. So that's nevertooldtolift.com/start-here, or look in the description below. It's available as a paperback on Amazon, which is paid for. I think it's about $13.99. But if you have a look on Amazon, so just search Never Told to Lift, or again, if you just look in the description below, you'll find that there. A lot of people don't take action from a book, and they need something that is a bit more interactive, and they like to have a bit of support from me. So the online course might be an option, because you'll get my cat's climbing up the door there. You're going to get the video-based lessons. So they're all kind of 5-minute chunk lessons split into 9 modules, and there's about 4 to 9 lessons within each module. So nice little bite-sized chunks you can go through. The theory is all the same, but it's a much more interactive way to go through it. And also there's weekly group sessions that are just for members of Stronger for Life. So you get to kind of ask me any questions if there's any sticking points, or you're struggling to get going, or a certain exercise causes pain and you're not sure what to do. I think you can see my cat in the corner there. You can... It's a lot more supportive, and it's quite a nice real community feel in those group chats. Everyone kind of helps support each other and holds each other accountable. So that might be something you're interested in. So that's nevertoldtolift.com/course. But for now, I don't think there's any other questions coming in. So again, I'll just leave you that quote as I finish up here. So if you think lifting weights is dangerous, try being weak is dangerous, and just keep that in mind over the next week if you're thinking about getting into weights or not. But any questions, if you're watching this on the replay and you want me to answer it next week, then again, leave a question and I will check back next week. But for now, I hope you all have a good week, and I will be back here on next Wednesday at 12 o'clock for another Q&A session. Thanks.